Thank you. Thank you. We save the best for last, and we're going to hope to get in a couple questions and answers if we have time. Our next speaker was the leading anti-war member of the United States Congress for years and years. Usually, so-called opponents of wars in the United States Congress are people who fund them and support them and even cheer for them, but criticize certain bits of the wars. This man tried to stop them. And found leverage and used different techniques and had successes and led the way toward the idea of some representation of anti-war human beings in the government in this city. We need that kind of power in Washington, D.C. and in the world. He has great practical wisdom to share with all of you. Please welcome Dennis Kucinich.
David Swanson, thank you so much for your kind introduction and for your leadership, along with Leah and others in this room, in keeping alive the hope that we can, in fact, have a world that will move beyond war. Each one of us in this room is a leader. As I look around the room and as I saw people coming in, I recognize individuals who I've met across the country and people who have taken a stand in their own community, people who were willing to physically put themselves on the line to challenge this corrupt system. And this gathering today is of consequence because we are participating in a unified field here, which resonates with people all over the country and all over the world. There is what the philosopher and psychologist Jung called a collective unarticulated consciousness that relates to sustaining the world, to holding up the world, to causing people to come together on behalf of their practical aspirations for peace in their homes, in their communities, for economic and social justice, for human rights. These are all practical concerns that people have. And these are yearnings which identify us as members of one common human family. The big lie about war is that somehow we're separate from each other. We're different than each other. It's a lie that continues to be promoted today. But the real truth, the singular truth of our existence is that we, the peoples of the world, are one. We are one. We are one in our aspirations, we are one in our hopes, we are one in our desire for peace. So this truth of human unity, this truth of oneness, is continually reflected in the technological evolution that takes place. When you understand that the power of a cell phone, we can transmit this conference today, any part of it, around the world instantaneously. And we are, thank you. But let it not be lost. Let the thought not be lost how that really does reinforce this idea of human unity. That McLuhan's Global Village does, in fact, exist. That if we can pick up a phone and call someone on the other side of the globe now, send a picture across the globe in a matter of a millisecond, if we can get on a plane and fly virtually anywhere in the world in a matter of hours, or what is this idea that somehow there's an underlying separation that can only be obliterated through war? It is an upside down kind of thinking that has become our national policy. Quite a journey has been made from the days of E pluribus unum. That motto that was part of the foundational principles of this country, out of many we are one. Human unity, we're all one. Today we look at a country that is divided just as the resources of America have been used to divide the world. I was elected to the United States Congress in 1996, and it wasn't my first run. Matter of fact, the first time I ran was in '72. Just barely able to qualify for the ballot, but I ran in 1972. And I have here a copy of one of the leaflets that I distributed in the 23rd Congressional District in 1972. And the title of it says, Kucinich says, "End the War." And President Nixon now admits his policy of de-escalation in Vietnam has failed. I'm reading sub-headlines here. Why make the same mistake again? Stop this waste. I'm not the only one in this room, I understand that, who was there at the time. But when I finally got to Congress, on my 5th try, 24 years later, one of the first hearings I had was as a member of the Government Oversight Committee. The Pentagon was asked to come forward to justify their budget, their spending, and it turned out they had over $1 trillion, T for trillion, dollars in accounts that had not and could not be reconciled. $1 trillion. General Smedley Butler, we all know him, was a racket. We understand that. I saw it. And when I saw that, and when I saw they couldn't account for the spending, I was determined from that moment not to vote for a single appropriation for arms for the military, and I kept that through 16 years in Congress because it's all a waste of money and it's a racket. You know, they try to justify this by saying, well, protect our troops. Right? We heard that. We heard that at the beginning of the Iraq War. We have to keep funding the war to protect our troops. And we were saying, protect them, bring them home. We have seen the resources of this country squandered in this racket called war. And we've seen both political parties participate. And we've seen presidents who were elected as, quote, anti-war, turn around and keep funding wars ad infinitum. We've seen political parties take cash from defense contractors and keep the war machine going. We've seen Democratic political leaders promise a new Congress in 2006 to take America in a direction of stopping the war. They got that new Congress, and the minute they took office, they kept the war going again, and they kept funding it. We have to stop this racket. We have to challenge these people inside the political establishment to stop this racket. We know what's going on. We know the money that's exchanging hands. We know how they're promoting political campaigns and saying, well, we love America. They love America. They love their money even more. We have to reclaim our nation. Now, I have seen this this effort to keep pushing us into war. I saw it in 1999 when Bill Clinton needed authorization to continue an air war against Serbia, when there were maybe 1 million people in the streets of Belgrade protesting their own government, and then we unleashed violence against them and cut short the change and actually ended up helping Milosevic. We have a foreign policy, which is foreign. It's foreign to human security. It's foreign to aspirations for peace. It's foreign to our national needs here in America. But I had the opportunity to have this catbird seat. I was there. I saw the genesis of war within the Democratic caucus. I saw how men and women who ordinarily you think would be placid, peaceful, God-fearing, loving their children, and all of a sudden they become emboldened with this spirit of war, this imbibing in this Manichaean struggle of the forces of light and darkness, and yet they're voting wrong constantly. They have no idea why this is coming about, and they get pulled into one war after another. I saw it. I saw it in the buildup to the war in Iraq. There was not a shred of evidence, legitimate evidence, after 9/11. We all know this, that Iraq had anything to do with 9/11, with Al-Qaeda's role in 9/11. Iraq had nothing to do with the weapons of mass destruction, and yet all that was told to the American people in order to justify a war. And the Congress bought it. People can't say they didn't know. And it wasn't just whether the vote was an issue. There were dozens of votes afterward that kept the spending going. Many of us took the Bush administration to court. I led an effort in that regard, and the court said, look, Congress, you want to stop the war? Don't ask us to do it. You do it. Cut off funding. And so for people who want to, we have, one of the reasons why our presence here is so important today is that our national political dialogue is not listening to what we're saying. They're not hearing it. It's not resonating. We had a Democratic primary, and this should have been a major issue in the primary, and it wasn't. Let's get real. And because it wasn't a major issue in the primary, it's not a major issue in the general. And we're really voting in the general election on phantasms. We're voting on mythologies. We're not voting on records. We're not voting on demonstrated commitments to either peace or war. It's all like caricatures. We have to start reclaiming our country by reclaiming a political dialogue that is rooted in reality and not in mythology. And it has to be rooted in the ability to break out of the two-party system right now, which is taking America to hell in a handbasket. I stopped going to meetings of the Democratic caucus. I called it the Democratic carcass. Years before I left Congress, because all they talked about was how bad the Republicans are, polling and raising money. Now, I've talked to friends of mine in the Republican Party who said that what they generally talk about in the Republican conference is how bad the Democrats are, polling and raising money. That's the difference between the two-party system. But we're not hearing a discussion about how we can achieve true national security. And yes, it is about asking for accountability. For accountability for those who have sent us into wars based on lies. They need to be accountable. Dave Swanson and I worked for several weeks on an impeachment resolution of George Bush that I delivered for almost 5 hours on the floor of the House of Representatives, thanks to strong kidneys. And And Dave, as most people aren't aware, that I only read about half of them that we had come up with in terms of indictment counts. There were at least another 50 that we could have brought forward. But the same beast that has to be tamed is still inside our government. It's not that George Bush has left and everything changed. We hoped it would, but it hasn't. So as I would see these discussions inside the party and see people tending to go to war, one of the things that occurred to me back in 2001, that our government's policies have helped to create some cultural problems here. Our commitment to war comes home. Is there anyone who doesn't think that the wars that are going on in the streets of our country are not connected to the wars that we're proliferating around the world? You know, our African American brothers and sisters have been acknowledged. Their history is acknowledged with a museum that is opening this weekend. But where is the acknowledgement by our government of the violence that is being visited upon people of color in our cities at the same time? And I'm not just talking about only police violence. I'm talking about economic violence as well. You know, after the government bailed out the banks, they forgot towns like Cleveland, where banks were selling no-doc and low-doc loans by the thousands into communities of color and crushing people's aspirations by calling those loans later, knowing full well they were actually tricking people into signing on the dotted line so that they could collateralize these debt obligations and build a windfall on Wall Street. There's massive civil rights violations there that are continuing to this date. In 1968, the Kerner Commission delivered a report to the American people about the underlying conditions in American inner cities, and we are still seeing today those conditions really no different. Whether we're talking about measures of education, healthcare, employment, peace. So when I look at what's happening in the country, I still want to go back to the importance of creating a structure of peace in America, which is why in July of 2001, 2 months before 9/11, people from around the country came together to assist in the introduction of legislation to create a structure inside our government which would deal with the issues of domestic violence, spousal abuse, gang violence, gun violence, violence in the school, racial violence, violence against gays, all of the symptomatologies in our society which we have taken in and which gets reinforced by our government visiting war everywhere around the world. This idea, which then was called the Department of Peace, and thanks to Barbara Lee is now the Department of Peace Building, recognizes something, and that is that each one of us has a responsibility. We talk about a collective consciousness. Each one of us has the ability to inform a world that is either going to be more peaceful or more warlike. And so the idea of having a structure inside our government then legitimizes the work of peace in communities and helps to educate children to principles of peace sharing, peace giving, mutuality, looking at the other person as an aspect of oneself. We have to come to understand our capacities, because we can just look at war as an externalization and we can study it objectively, but just as Heisenberg said in his theories, you start looking at something so-called objectively, you change it by just observing it. We have to realize our power to inform a new world with our consciousness, our power through participating, not silently ever, in events that are occurring in the world, our power to be able to create new structures in our own government that are be responsive to the practical aspirations of people. And peace is I think, the most practical aspiration. So we can simultaneously and must challenge these wars, and at the same time create new structures to assure peace, so that someday in America, some child will be able to grow up without having to have lived through the government prosecuting a war in their name, where a child will be able to grow up where war will be some kind of distant memory. And we're planting those seeds of peace now here. And it's a very hopeful moment for that reason. And it's a reason for us to redouble our commitments. The many paths that have been walked by individuals here that led to this moment right here, to our convergence, each one of those is a sacred path. Each one of those needs to be supported. Each one of those needs to be strengthened. And each one of those has a chance to be made stronger through our collective aspirations to have a country that we can call its own and a country that will truly stand for peace because we insist upon it. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
I don't know if Harvey Wasserman needs a big introduction with most of you, but Harvey is a leading anti-war activist, a leading anti-nuclear energy activist, a leading environmentalist, senior, I don't know what's senior about it, advisor to Greenpeace, is that correct?
More senior every day, actually.
Okay. Leading voting rights and election verification activist. And so we wanted to find somebody who could talk about the intersection between anti-war and pro-environment. We all know that the wars and the military are the big destroyer of the environment, but how do we bring these issues together? How do we bring these movements together? Harvey's in every movement, and we are very, very fortunate to have him here. Harvey Wasserman.
This is David Hartso's fantastic autobiography here. I want to read this. During the Vietnam War, he was out on a canoe with a bunch of activists against blockading a ship called the Nitro, which was about to go to Vietnam. And he was, go ahead. Okay, so he was the ship finally was about to set sail. And this is just a couple of lines here that completely blew me away when I read this. As the Nitro lifted anchor and began to depart, we paddled frantically trying to block it. I looked up on the deck and saw a crowd of sailors cheering and giving us the supportive V sign of peace with their hands. Then, to our utter amazement, 7 of the sailors jumped off the ship into the ocean and began swimming toward us to join our blockade. Let's hear about that. So, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that, I got to tell you. So, thank you, David, for that. It's fantastic. Okay, I'm actually going to cover, since David said I was in all these movements, which I am. It's ADD, folks. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the spiritual origins of war in this country, very briefly, and then about election protection, because we do seem to have one coming up. And then I'm going to talk about stopping nukes and the shift to solartopia as it's laid out here. And we'll do that all by 2:15, and then we'll take questions from 2:15 to 2:30. How's that? And comments and all that stuff. So first I want to talk, I am a historian. I'm just finishing up a history of the United States called America at the Brink of Rebirth. It shows the United States history in terms of 6 very easy cycles. I teach at a community college in Columbus, Ohio, and I've never had a textbook that any of them could read, let alone me read it. So I've tried to write one that's readable and easily explainable. I do want to talk very briefly. In this country, you know, most people, we presume, of course, war is a racket. We know it's a racket. We know it's a business. All these bases are profit centers. They have nothing to do with national security whatsoever. The only security they have to do with is major CEO multi-million dollar salaries. But in American history, there is these Puritans came here in 1630, and these Puritans had a very, very specific ideology, which is absolutely psychotic. And one of the things that they believed was that they, aside from being sexually deprived by choice, which is a whole other world, they believed that they were superior to the rest of the world, and this is a part of our strain in the American psyche. And one of the reasons that we have so many bases, and why we're so preoccupied with our military and with race, and the Puritans believed that the white Puritans were superior to everybody else. It wasn't just black people and Indians; they were superior to Jews and to Protestants, other Protestants, and certainly Catholics as well. And so they did. There is this word they use called "city on the hill," a phrase that Reagan picked up, of course. And there was the belief that they were going to establish in Boston, and I've worn my Red Sox hat today, by the way, because I was born there. And they're doing great this year, but we won't go into that. So they believed that it was their job to purify the world. And this is a major strain in our American psyche. This belief that the United States, or America before then, the Puritans who came here, are spiritually superior. They're anointed by God to cleanse the earth, to conquer the earth, by the way, very dominating, and of course male-dominated God the Father patriarchy that came here and basically to rape our Mother Earth. That's what a lot of American imperialism is about. It's an oversimplification to believe it's strictly economic. There is this deep psychological, spiritual, religious crusade going on within the American national makeup, that dates the Puritans in 1630. And if anybody want to be bored to tears, come talk to me afterwards and I'll tell you about it. But it is a mistake to place the burden of empire entirely on our economic imperatives here. There is a deep spiritual imperative that has to be cleansed. And of course, as one of your fellow pagans, I can tell you that extirpating this Puritan belief is a hell of a lot of fun, and we have to deal with that part of it. So that is part of our psyche. We do have to comprehend as we move towards a world without war. It's not just the money. It is a deep-seated belief that white Protestant Americans are superior to the rest of the world and have a duty to cleanse the rest of the world. So never lose track of that. We also apparently have an election coming up. And at least I've been told that. And although I was born in Boston, I have lived in Columbus, Ohio for many, many years. And in 2004, we witnessed the theft of an election. There's absolutely no doubt that John Kerry, who absolutely did not deserve it, was nonetheless the rightful winner of the 2004 election. And so my buddy Bob Fitrakis and I have written 7 books about this. Yes, we have. This is the 7th book. It does not contain the final chapter in which we explain how Bernie Sanders was the rightful winner of the Democratic primaries. I have a petition, by the way, to ask Deborah Wasserman Schultz to drop her middle name. So far, she hasn't replied to me yet. I'm going to pass these out, and I'm going to pass this sign-up sheet. If you want a copy of this book, I will send it to you free. If you want this one, you either have to pledge to review it on the internet or give David and World Beyond War another $10, okay? So I'm going to pass these out. But please do sign the sign-up sheet only with your email. That's all you need. And I will send you a copy of this book with the final chapter on Bernie, and also a copy of Solartopia, which is my book on a renewable energy world, and I'll talk about that for the bulk of the talk. I'm going to tell you right now that it may depress the hell out of you, but the reality of our election system in this United States is it's completely a fake. The whole election is a charade. It's all done electronically now. And we keep being called conspiracy theorists. But in American history, especially when we talk about war, conspiracies are very, very real. The Spanish-American War, we got into the Spanish-American War because the battleship Maine, that was the excuse, was sunk in Havana Harbor, and we blamed the Spaniards. Well, they found the boat, and it was not sunk by the Spaniards. It blew up from the inside. That's conspiracy number 1. Conspiracy number 2, we got into World War I, presumably because those nasty Germans sank the Lusitania, which they did do. and it was a passenger ship, but the Germans claimed that it was carrying weapons of war. Woodrow Wilson denied that it was carrying weapons of war. Woodrow Wilson, by the way, is my number 2 least favorite president behind Richard Nixon. So Wilson denied it. The Huns were barbarians. We got into the war, World War I, which was completely a horrible thing. We should never have gotten involved in. The vast majority of the American public opposed our entry into World War I, but those barbaric Germans sank the Lusitania. We had to get retribution. They found the Lusitania. The Lusitania has been found. It was in the bottom of the Irish Sea. By God, it was totally loaded with weapons. The Germans were absolutely right. Another conspiracy theory that turned out to be true. The Gulf of Tonkin, for God's sakes. You know, everybody at the time knew that the Gulf of Tonkin was a total put-up job. But if we said that, and we did, we were charged with being conspiracy theorists. Robert S. McNamara, the Secretary of Defense or War at the time under Lyndon Johnson, has since come out and said that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. It was a complete put-up job, and so Vietnam was a total lie, as we all know. And then, of course, we're still looking for those weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I think they actually are on George W. Bush's ranch, and he doesn't know it. But so there's 4 conspiracy theories that absolutely positively are true. Don't get me going on the JFK, Martin Luther King, and Robert F. Kennedy assassinations. But just think of just think of one name, Allen Dulles. Okay, so enough of that. We have studied the electoral system in the United States. It is completely rigged, the electronically as well as on the voter rolls. We call it, as you see in the book, strip and flip. They strip the voter rolls of people who are suspected of being black, or young, or Hispanic, or maybe voting Democratic. Mostly it's been the Republicans doing it, but we see I'm going to tell you, it's cut both ways, especially in this primary season. And so literally millions of people have been stripped from the voter rolls. That's how George W. Bush got elected in 2000. It had absolutely nothing to do with Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader had no hand whatsoever in electing George W. Bush. What they did was they used a computer program to strip 90,000 people from the voter rolls, and an election was decided by 537 votes. In 2004, they stripped the voter rolls of more than 300,000 people in Ohio, in almost 10% of the electorate. 90% of the people they stripped off were black. And then, when that wasn't enough, between 12:20 and 2 a.m. in the morning of election night, J. Kenneth Blackwell, the Secretary of State, with the computer guy, whose name was Michael Connell, who since mysteriously died, they flipped the vote count. John Kerry was winning with 4.2% of the vote, more than 200,000 votes at 12:20. At 2 a.m., the vote count suddenly switched, and George W. Bush won by 2.5%. It's a 6.7% switch. It's absolutely, virtually statistically impossible. This year, more than 50% of the votes will be cast on electronic voting machines. And in the states where you have a governor and a secretary of state from the same party, which is Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, and Arizona, all Republicans, they can, at midnight, make the vote count whatever the hell they want. There is absolutely no monitoring or accountability on the electronic vote count on the voting machines that are used to cast and count more than 50% of the vote in the United States. And given the nature of the Electoral College, which has put 5 losers into the White House, I meant that literally, not figuratively, but you can take your own conclusions. The bottom line is that in a close election, which will look like it might be, the whole election could come down to Ohio. Again, the governor of Ohio is a Republican named John Kasich, but he hates Trump, and he has a real vested interest in actually having Hillary win. There is a very complicated situation, but however it goes, whatever we want to think about our elections, we are advocating. They are simply not credible. Ask Jimmy Carter, as a matter of fact. Carter has said the American elections are not worth honoring because they are just too corrupt. And the bottom line is that we have to switch. We have an Ohio plan, which Bob and I devised, which is universal automatic voter registration upon turning 18. Precincts wherever, on a basic minimum so people can easily vote. Precincts run by our college and high school students, plus people over 65 at $15 an hour. No voter registration, no voter ID required. Your signature is good enough. It's a 5-year felony. There's no history recently of people multiple voting and doing that. And finally, universal hand-counted paper ballots. where you cast a ballot, it goes into a transparent box, and the votes don't move. And then we have advocated that the ballots be made of hemp, so in 2 years they can be smoked, and everybody will be... So, and that is essential, we believe, to stopping war. You know, if we're going to stop war, we're going to have a democracy. And, you know, we're all concerned about Citizens United. We don't want a corporate personhood, which is a complete joke. We have nothing to do with the 14th Amendment or any of the people who wrote it, but they swung it through. And, of course, that's one of the big prizes in this election. Hillary has actually come out against Citizens United because there was a film about her that was actually used in the Supreme Court case. But we want to get rid of Citizens United. We want, obviously, restrictions on corporate money going into our elections. But until we have an actual, reliable paper ballot system, it's just not going to happen. We have to have in order to stop war, we have to have a democracy. There's just no way about it. We have our democracy, our body politic is suffering from a cancer, and the cancer is the power of the corporations. Corporations have human rights, but no human responsibilities, and you know, and that has to stop. By the way, I do want to mention Rocky here is actually this fellow Rocky Del Fuentes is actually on the ballot in about 40 states in the country, right? Or getting there, and you may want to talk to him. He's a really interesting guy, and he's actually running for president. He's actually on ballots. And he will have legal standing when we have to sue over the outcome of the elections wherever we possibly can. So remember that, please. Hand count. We will not stop war without a democracy. We will not get a democracy until we have hand-counted paper ballots. They can spend all the money they want on campaigns. I'm actually not that concerned about that. But, you know, Citizens United is wrong. It's got to be dealt with. But until we get a viable hand-counted paper ballot vote count, we got nothing here. We will have an empire. We will have an out-of-control corporatocracy until we really can get our votes counted. Believe me, I live in Ohio. I saw it happen, and I don't think I have to convince you what's needed. So in a world beyond war, we're going to have a world beyond computerized electronic voting machines. Germany, Ireland, Romania, Japan, and Canada all have hand-counted paper ballots. And in fact, the Irish, being the Irish, switched to electronic voting machines, and then they got rid of them. They didn't work. They didn't want them anymore. So they're back to having hand-counted paper ballots. So there you go. Let's segue from there into this little concept of economic and ecological democracy and an environment beyond war. In 1973, before all of you were born, I was living on a hippie farm in Massachusetts, and we had come out of the anti-war movement, and we were still very active in the movement against the war in Vietnam. But on one glorious day in December in 1973, the local utility company came in and announced they were going to build a nuclear power plant 4 miles from our house. We were all thrilled, you know. We were getting a little bored already. You know, broccoli only grows so fast, and what can I tell you? And I was, by the way, an expert on nuclear power because I had done a report on it in 9th grade, so I knew everything about nuclear power. And we never actually had a meeting. We just all assumed that we were going to not allow this nuke to be built, and we were going to kick their butts and get them out of town. And by God, we did. They never came in with a bulldozer into Montague, Massachusetts. The place they were going to build the nuclear power plant is now a nature conservancy. It was totally preserved. You can go there and lie down and drop acid or whatever you want to do. And this phrase, "no nukes," came out of our movement. One of the great advertising slogans in history, certainly very effective. And we then I've been working on nuclear power ever since, 43 years. And, you know, I'll probably take another 43. So on 126, we can get together again and, you know, talk about it. I don't know if I did the math right. But the bottom line is that at the time, when they came in there, we laid out all these objections. And, of course, the nuclear power industry is an offshoot of the nuclear weapons industry. Nuclear power plants are basically a happy face on the nuclear weapons industry. It was devised by the Atomic Energy Commission. It was kind of like a branch business, and it also gave the guys, the men and women who devised the atomic bomb, sort of a conscious absolving thing. It's say, okay, well, we destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but maybe we can generate cheap electricity. And of course, they came in and they said nuclear power is going to be too cheap to meter, and that the waste wouldn't be a problem, and that the reactors couldn't explode. And this was a big deal, by the way. When we first started, we, of course, said, well, we don't want these reactors to blow up. And the industry came down on us with a ton of bricks, and they said, it is physically impossible for a nuclear reactor to explode. I mean, I heard this 1,000 times. We in the movement had to go and talk to people who were out speaking and say, don't say a nuclear reactor can explode, because they can't. But they could, as it turned out. We barely missed at 3 Mile Island. We were really close at 3 Mile Island. I'm going to tell you a quick story because it reflects on activism. 3 Mile Island Unit 2, well, both of them are, and one is finally closing, are in the flight path of the Harrisburg Airport. If you ever fly into Harrisburg, you fly right over the damn thing. And there was one woman in Harrisburg, in central Pennsylvania, who said, you can't build these reactors, you can't build Unit 2 without an enhanced containment. And by God, she won. She just did, that was her thing, and that's all she did for years. Demand a stronger containment at TMI Unit 2. And she got it, and TMI Unit 2 was probably the most powerful, strongest containment of all the reactors built in the United States. And by God, in 1979, on March 28th, when that thing melted, there was tremendous pressure inside the reactor. We still don't know why it didn't explode. There was a small hydrogen explosion. It could have been a bigger explosion. But it is possible that the TMI explosion was contained because of that stronger containment dome. Not because a plane flew into it, but because this woman made them do a stronger containment. And, you know, to this day, it is entirely, well, Arnie Gunderson, who's one of our guy, our nuclear engineer, thinks that there was a breach of containment at TMI, but it did not blow, thank God, and it may have been because this woman fought because of the airplane. So never give up on anything. I mean, it's really an important deal. So then, of course, Chernobyl exploded, and all the Americans said, well, that's a Soviet reactor, that can't come here. The 4 reactors that blew up, by God, they blew up at Fukushima, are American reactors. Those are General Electric reactors. They were designed, and the construction was partly supervised by General Electric. And we have 24 in the United States that are exact replicas of Fukushima. And then many more that are the BWR model that could blow like Fukushima. So now we are, at the time that we started, we were asked repeatedly, if you don't get the energy from nuclear power, where are you going to get it? And we said, solar, wind. We had no idea what we were talking about, but it sounded good. And they had actually devised the first photovoltaic cell. We've known about photovoltaic, the chemical reaction that's the basis of photovoltaic cells since the 1830s. But in 1954, the Bell Labs devised a photovoltaic cell, which I've actually held in my hand, and it still generates electricity. They send it around to conferences. And then the second photovoltaic cell, anybody know where it went? It went up in space on the Voyager. That's what it was devised for. It's devised for the solar satellites, and it's still working. But many of the ones that they put up there are still working. Let's put it that way. And so there was a nascent solar energy industry in the United States, starting at the Bell Labs in 1953 and 54. And then, of course, when windmills were around, there was a guy at UMass named William Hieronymus, and he had a design that everybody laughed at him. It was kind of like the Gyro Gearloose of the nuke industry, of the renewable energy industry. And he had this model of a 5 megawatt, which is really big, windmill that would be offshore and would be anchored by chains to the bottom of the ocean, not directly by posts. And people laughed at him. This was back in the 70s. And we had a conference at UMass in 76 or 5 called the Toward Tomorrow Fair, where we, this was all unveiled. And this guy named Amory Lovins. Anybody know Amory Lovins? So Amory Lovins was there, and we posited what I now call a solar-topian vision. We posited the idea that the entire world could be powered. Our entire industrial, post-industrial economy and civilization could get 100% of its energy from renewables. There will be solar, photovoltaic cells, windmills, recycling of waste and methane from dumps, and biofuels, and tidal energy, and ocean wave energy, all those things we threw into the mix and said that should be enough to power the entire Earth. And of course, we were viewed pretty much as conspiracy theorists, saying this was not possible, it would never happen. But we didn't know it at the time, although we suspected at the time, actually, that we were birthing a multi-trillion-dollar industry. The biggest industry in the history of the world will be photovoltaic cells. I'm telling you right now. You know that scene in The Graduate where the guy comes up to Dustin Hoffman and he says, plastics. Okay, so photovoltaics. I mean, that is really what's going to happen on this earth. And I am actually, this is a sentence I never thought I'd say, but I am moving to Los Angeles because I think that Los Angeles, it could be the first, will be the first megalopolis on this planet to be operated by solar energy. There is, as we know, plenty of sun in LA, and one of the things is when you fly into LA or Burbank, where I now live or will live, I have 2 grandsons there. So there you go. That explains everything. Right? 2 of my 10 grandchildren live in LA, and I'm not going to miss them growing up. So when you fly into LA, you see tens of square miles of rooftops. But not only do you see these rooftops, they're flat. Because in the east, you know, the rooftops, you got to deal with snow. There hasn't been snow in a long time in LA. It could happen, but you know, I didn't bring my skis to LA. So we will cover those rooftops with photovoltaic cells, and not only that, it will be extremely profitable. The smart money, it's hard to say this at a peace conference or a left conference. You rarely have had the opportunity to say this, but the smart money is where we want to go. You know, green power is hugely profitable. There are 209,000 people in the United States today working in the solar industry. There are 90,000 in wind, way more than coal, way more than nuclear. Now, the nuke war that we're worried about now, I think we have effectively stopped the idea that new nuclear reactors will be built. They are completely priced out. Renewable energy has just plummeted in cost, largely because of the Germans. You know, Germany, this is a great moment in our activist history. The German Greens won a mandate many years ago that Germany should go 100% green, but the industrial complex resisted. And then Angela Merkel came in, and she's center-right, and she just completely dragged her feet. And the Greens called a huge demonstration against nuclear power and for this energy Wende, this conversion to 100% renewables. And in between the time they called the demonstration and the time the demonstration was going to happen, Fukushima happened. And Angela Merkel, who is a chemist, said, okay, now we don't know if it was partly political, partly probably, you know, she's a smart woman. And she said, okay, we're going to go with this. And the Germans have gone with this 100% conversion to renewable energy. And it is happening. Of course, you know, Germany is just small hippie outpost. It's only the 4th largest economy in the world. So when we get to 3, 2, and 1, we'll know. But the Chinese, by the way, are making a decision. Chinese are in the midst of deciding whether they're going to go 100% renewable or not. They are building nuclear plants, which is a catastrophe, but they're also building photovoltaics. Originally, they jumped into photovoltaics with the idea of crashing the world market and then taking over the world photovoltaic industry. They almost did it, but they didn't quite wipe everybody else out. And so they wound up with a huge surplus of photovoltaic cells, and they're actually putting them on their own industries. Imagine that. And so there is kind of like a test period going on politically and economically and in terms of policy as to whether they're going to continue building nukes. But they are definitely moving ahead with renewables, with solar, and they are actually trying to close their coal plants. What we call coal, oil, nukes, and gas, King Kong. We are, you know, it's King Kong versus Solartopia here. China really holds the balance. We have stopped. There are 4 reactors under construction in the U.S., 2 in Georgia and 2 in South Carolina. And then there's one in Finland and another one in France, and they are all catastrophes. And Wall Street is actually our ally on this. Nobody on Wall Street wants to invest in new nukes. The whole future of nukes turns on how much money they can gouge out of Congress, and that's diminishing because photovoltaics have come on so rapidly. And it is a huge deal, and it's very much about war because nuclear power is a war on the economy. And if we are concerned, as Ira and so beautifully and others have talked about, we're concerned about nuclear weapons. Nuclear power plants are pre-deployed nuclear weapons of mass destruction, We have now seen that they can, by God, explode. And there is actually more radiation inherent in the nuclear core of an old reactor than there are in most nuclear weapons. The amount of radiation that was released, cesium-137 in particular, the amounts of radiation released at Fukushima are way beyond what was released at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The only good thing about Hiroshima and Nagasaki is that those bombs didn't hit the ground. They exploded in the air. If they had hit on the ground, the fallout would have been way, way worse. Many millions of people would have died if those bombs had hit the ground at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just one of the facts of it. They were in the air, so they didn't rise up so much contamination, but the contamination at Fukushima in those 4 reactors and at Chernobyl is incalculable. And we have 100 reactors deployed in this country. They are sitting ducks for terrorists. You don't have to crack the core. You don't have to crack the containment at a nuclear reactor to cause a major catastrophic release of radiation. It is a nightmare. I won't go into it, but the physics are very simple. And destroying a nuclear reactor, turning it into a nuclear weapon, a piece of cake. I'm sorry, but and we are astonishingly lucky that it hasn't happened yet. And all these reactors now, they're amortized. The public has paid for them many times over, and they're still not economic. We have a bunch of a bunch of people running around who are saying, I shouldn't have said that, I retract that. A bunch of people running around who claiming that there's a new environmental move towards nuclear power. It's utter bullshit. There is absolutely no movement in the environmental movement towards nuclear power, except for a few very well-funded people coming out of the corporate sector. And they are beyond now. They have thrown in the towel on new reactors. Now they're talking about small ones, they're talking about this, talking about that. The economic forces on our side against the building of new reactors, thank God, are pretty much overwhelming. They might slip one or two, they might try and slip one or two in advance, but it takes them so long, it's so expensive, it's so impractical. I think we've actually won that, and we should congratulate ourselves. We do not see any more nuclear power plants being deployed, but the 100 that are still left here in the U.S. and the 400 or so worldwide are a nightmare. They are not accidents waiting to happen. They're accidents in progress. The one at Davis-Besse in Toledo, near Toledo, is crumbling. It is literally crumbling. You got the 2 at Diablo Canyon and the 2 at Indian Point are on major earthquake faults. God knows, I don't even want to, as Winston Churchill said about nuclear weapons, they'll make the rubble bounce. And the amounts of radiation that can come out of these reactors is just absolutely catastrophic. And they need to shut. It's very difficult to shut operating reactors. We have done so. About 7 have shut in the last couple of years. More than a dozen in the last 2 or 3 years. The economics are on our side. What's happening now, the big battle in this nuclear war, is that the industry is going into state legislatures, which have all been bought and paid for by the Koch brothers. And the state legislature, and this was a very clear plan, and they really turned it over in 2010. When they won the gerrymandering of the country, another big issue on our elections, along with Electoral College, and they really took the state legislatures really shifted in 2010 to not just Republican, but totally corporate owned. Our state legislatures around the country are totally corporate owned, and they're going into the legislatures and they're getting huge sums of money, as Bernie would say. In New York, Governor Cuomo, the alleged liberal, just laid out $7 billion in public money to keep 4 atomic reactors open in upstate New York that are absolute catastrophes. Total wars on the environment. So the great news is, amidst all that, we're fighting. We win reactor by reactor. We've shut the one in Vermont after God knows how long. We've shut a number of them. The economics are on our side. If we can cut them off at the pass and prevent these subsidies coming from the state governments, then we will win, and these reactors will shut. But, there's 100 of them and a 400 worldwide, so we got to do this quick. And I'll end by this. The war on the environment and energy has been, by the way, the number one polluter. There are many, we got GMOs, we got, always such a list of polluting problems in our world, but energy has been number one. Coal, oil, nukes, and gas. We now have the technology, and the money is on our side to completely convert our economy to 100% renewable energy. Not just LA, but everywhere in this country, as we're seeing in Germany. My favorite line in the entire Solartopian movement was, of course, from Fox News. and they're having a debate about the conversion in energy. And the Fox News commentator said, well, of course, it's much easier for Germany to go to solar because they have so much more sunlight than they do in the United States. That went viral immediately in California. So, we have the resources, we have the money, we have the technology. We can end the war on the environment, at least in the energy sector. Then we can convert to organic food and naturally grown hemp and all the other great stuff. We can do that. But as Gar and Barbara talked about yesterday, this community building activity, and I'll finish with this and we'll open it up, okay? This community building activity that we need to do, the renewable conversion is perfectly suited for that. That's, if there is a God, she put renewables in our hands at this point in time to convert our economy and our world to economic democracy. Because you can go in now to a community, this has been going on for 30, 40 years. You can go in, and I'd love to do it in South Central LA, where there are blocks of homes that are close together with plenty of sunlight, but you can go all over the country, all over the world, and get communities to convert together to renewables. And it makes economic sense. There is short-term profit in it. There are zillions of jobs. That's where we need to go. And with that, we will remove from the war equation one of the major reasons for all these wars, which is our wars over energy. And maybe we can take down nuclear weapons as we take down the nuclear power plants as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Alternatives to war would essentially lean very, very heavily on diplomacy, on aid, and on negotiations, and nonviolent peacekeeping, nonviolent protection of other people. But what we're up against, of course, is so huge, with trillions of dollars of resources, human ingenuity, capacities being poured into what I would call the rat hole of United States military spending. And we are not only concerned with the war against the poor here in the United States, which has then manifested itself in the prison industrial complex. It mirrors the military industrial complex because both are entrenched with government salaries and corporate profit, making it very, very hard to uproot those systems. But we also have, I think, what should be called the military industrial media complex, the media endorsing so much of the militarism. There are a myriad different kinds of examples we could give you, but one we thought we would call upon is from ABC News, September 2016, shortly after the Anaconda, they spell it Anakonda, I'm not sure, but it certainly communicates the idea of a fearsome snake squeezing the life out of people. The Anaconda exercises that NATO performed along the borders of Russia, as though, imagine if we had such exercises happening along the border of Canada, along the border of Mexico. Well, this is Martha Raddatz giving her cheer, I think. It strikes me as pure propaganda, her cheer for just this kind of militarism.
The meeting comes as America's allies in Eastern Europe face an increasingly aggressive Russia and fear further incursion like Putin's annexation of Crimea. It's a threat our next commander-in-chief will face, and we took to the skies over Estonia for a first-hand look at what the U.S. military is doing to counter it.
Here we go.
Taking off in an F-15 vertically. A backseat ride with the U.S. Air Force.
There we go, and the G's.
We're flying along the newest front line in a reignited Cold War, where tensions with Russia have steadily escalated. Russia unafraid to flex its muscles, buzzing U.S. warships.
We have 2 Russian Su-24s currently conducting multiple passes.
Inching us closer to conflict. To counter war games, the U.S. training with its European partners.